welcome back. So one of the most visually interesting objects in Unreal is a particle system. So we're going to take a look at how to adjust and edit and interact with particle systems in blueprinting so that we can use particles, turn them on and off for all of the different types of feedback and things that we want to do. So in order to do this, we're going to start by adding a particle system to the world where we want it to appear. So I'm going to use one from the starter content, particles, and I'm just going to throw a fire particle into the world. Then we're going to set up a trigger box that we're going to use as the trigger that's going to affect this particle system. So I'm going to add a trigger box. Now, my trigger box doesn't have any visuals along with it, so I'm going to make one quick change just so we learn a new technique or a new tool. I'm going to go into my trigger box and I'm going to look over on the details, and we're going to find that under rendering, we have an option to make it hidden in-game. I'm going to turn that off. That's going to mean that now my trigger box is going to be visible while my game plays. That way I'll know when I'm inside of it. With that done, we're going to select our trigger box and we're going to make a blueprint out of it. So I'm going to make a new subclass of trigger box that I'm going to call BP particle trigger. And we're going to make sure that this is saved in our blueprints folder. Here's my trigger box inside my event graph. We're going to use our begin play. We're going to use our begin overlap, but I'm going to get rid of the event tick because we're not going to be using that. Here are my variables. I'm going to make a variable for the emitter that I'm going to use. I'm going to access, and I'm going to make that of type emitter. And I'm going to expose it so that we can edit it inside of the editor. I'm going to bring that emitter into the world so I can get that emitter. And then just like when we made a trigger box into a component that was part of another object, we're going to be looking at the component part of this emitter that actually is the particle system. So as I come off the emitter, I'm going to get particle system component. And the actions that we're going to do is we're going to interact with this particle system component. And what we're going to want to do is that when we begin playing and when we end overlap, we're going to take that particle system component and we're going to deactivate it. So I'm going to connect both of these up to deactivate. And then when we begin overlapping, that's where we're going to come in here and we're going to activate that component. So any components you might have, you can activate and deactivate those components by creating the object as a variable. And then from that object, you can get the individual component. And then when you get the individual component, you can tell it to activate or deactivate that component. So with this setup, we have a neat little particle affecting blueprint here that on begin play, it's going to deactivate the particle system. On end overlap, it's going to deactivate it. On begin overlap, it's going to activate it. So I can compile, I can save. And if I go back, I can select my trigger and I can make sure that under my default at the top, I've connected the emitter that I want to have interact with this trigger. And so now it's this fire particle that's going to be deactivated when we begin playing. And then it will become activated when I enter the trigger and deactivate again when I leave the trigger. So if I press play, there's my trigger. I move into it and my fire starts. I leave and my fire goes away. So now that we have the ability to turn particles on and off inside of Blueprint, you can think about how you can use those in conjunction with the other things that you've done. So for example, if you have your door object that opens, you may want to place some dust particles on the ground so it looks like the door is kicking up a little dust as it moves. So now you're able to turn particles on and off as part of your blueprints. That's an extra tool that you can use to make much more interesting levels.